Today we're going to tie a classic fly called the Tellico Nymph. First thing we're going to do is start with a 3761 nymph hook and some UTC 70 denier white thread. First thing we're going to do is tie in the tail. For that I'm going to use some wood duck feather, and I'm just going to kind of trim some fibers away from the feather and try to keep the tips as even as possible. And I like to use a fairly generous clump of about 20 or so fibers. We're going to tie them in so that they're about half of the length of the shank of the hook. Tie those in right on top of the shank here. Wrap back down on top of them. And we'll take it all the way back to the bend. Now we're going to tie in our casing material, and for that I'm just going to use a turkey feather, about 7 or so strands. I'm going to trim the tips blunt to make it a little easier to tie in. I'm going to peel. I made it a little too thick, so I'm going to take one of those strands and just peel it off of there. There we go. I'm going to tie that in so that it's even around the shank of the hook. So when I pull it over, I get kind of even coverage on both sides. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a piece of fine small copper wire. I'm going to tie that in along the side of the shank of the hook. And we're going to take that all the way back to the casing. Then we're going to take about 3 strands of peacock herl. You can use about 4 on a larger hook. Gotta be careful not to overdo it with too many strands though. I take my 3 strands and I kind of even up the tips a little bit. And I trim the tips down, giving me something nice and easy to tie in here at the back. Now I'm going to take this white thread and I'm just going to build up kind of a buggy taper on the fly, kind of with a thicker portion towards the front here. You could switch out for some 140 or denier, a little bit heavier stuff, and do it a little faster, but I like using this thinner thread so I have a little bit more control on how much I can add at one time. I just add a little bit, just build the taper, eventually kind of getting the look I like. Kind of making it look like a little mayfly nymph or something like that. It's kind of got some shoulders. This also makes a good little bluegill fly as well. It's probably what most anglers are using it today for, is bluegill. Once I have the taper, I'm going to take my other thread here, some 14-aught Veevus black thread. I'll just wrap back up over some of that UTC. Can trim out the UTC. Now I'm ready for my floss. I'm just going to use some single strand uni yellow floss. I'm going to take my thread about an eye's length away from the eye of the hook and just tie in that floss. Now that first wrap, I'm just going to kind of pull tight. Then I'll work my way back, pulling tighter as I get towards the middle section of the body here. You want to pull this floss nice and tight, or else it likes to wander on you on the shank of the hook. So really pull pretty tight. Nice even wraps as you work your way back. And then I'll turn and come forward. Still pulling pretty tight. I'm going to take my thread, back it off a couple turns from where I tied in, and then capture it. That just kind of helps minimize a little bit of bulk at the front of the fly. Trim out your floss. Now we can take our copper wire, pull it to the side, and I'm going to wrap my Peacock herl around that copper wire a few times. Usually about 5 or 6 times is fine. Just kind of helps it get started here. Then we're going to take it all, clip it together with a pair of hackle pliers. I'm going to twist it all together with the hackle pliers. We're going to build kind of a peacock herl rope with that wire. And you got to be careful not to overdo it or pull too hard, because then you'll break it and then you're back to square one. And I'm going to take that peacock herl rope, just spiral it forward, nice wide spirals. Usually you'll only get about 3 or 4 spirals in. That's all you need. Then you can capture it. And you can get in nice and close, careful not to trim your thread. Now we're ready for our legs. For those we're going to use just a whiting saddle hackle feather. I'm going to use a natural brown. We're going to strip back most of the fibers, just kind of exposing about a 1/2 inch section of feather. That's all you need. Don't need too many legs on this fly. You only need to do about a turn or 2 with it. We're just going to tie that in, trim off the excess, take my thread forward. Now we're going to take that hackle feather here and we're just going to kind of kink all those fibers back. And as I wrap this feather, I want those fibers to lay back onto the shank of the hook, kind of laying back, kind of wet fly style. Takes a little bit of coaxing sometimes if you get a difficult feather. That one wasn't too bad. Oopsie. As soon as I say that, I let go of it on accident. Now I'm just going to gently take all those fibers, pull them back, and wrap back up onto them with a few turns of thread. I'll help them all lay back. And then I'm going to split them right down the middle here. pull them to each side. I can take my turkey feather, pull it right up through them. Capture that with a couple tight wraps. Trim off the extra. Kind of cover up any of those butt ends with your thread here. This is where that 14/0 comes in pretty handy. Nice thin thread. Allows you to lay down quite a few finishing wraps. That is the Tellico Nymph, and to finish it, what we're going to do is just take those legs and pull them kind of down to the side, get them out of the way, because we're going to put a little bit of fly finish on here. You can either use the thick or the thin. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll start with the thick here. Just lay down a thin base with the thick, just to get it started. That way it doesn't penetrate too deep into the fibers. The thin will sometimes penetrate a little too much. Then we'll give that a quick zap. And I'll come in with a little bit of thin, just kind of finish her off. This one might be a little clogged on me. Poke it with my bodkin here, see if I can't unclog it. Well, we'll try a little bit of flow then. There we go. And that is the Tellico Nymph. Good little bluegill pattern. Nice classic trout pattern as well. You can watch this video for free on YouTube. You can also download this video on Vimeo as well. That is the Tellico Nymph.